The Winnipeg Jets are finally starting to narrow down their starting roster. Who's still here? Who has been sent back to juniors or the Moose? Let's chat about that on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Now, tonight's episode, obviously, we're focusing a little bit on the week ahead as the Jets are essentially wrapping up preseason, and they have started having some final scrimmages before, you get into the last two games of preseason, and then you basically know what your lineup's going to look like. And with all of that in mind, obviously, the Jets have made some final cuts. Not everyone has been returned yet. The Jets are still working with around 34 to 36 overall players, if I recall correctly. So fair few guys left before the Jets start making their final trimmings. But overall, I think you're getting a pretty good idea of who's made the team and who perhaps is sitting more on the bubble for the last couple of games. So we'll get to that in just a moment and who really stands out as still being here. But before we go too much further, just wanted to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and be sure to use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Now, like I said, looking at the Jets roster, let's chat about who has been cut as of this morning. So Braden Yager and Barlow have been returned to the junior leagues, while Parker Ford, Torgerson, and DiVincentis have been sent down to the Moose. Now, notice you probably didn't see Lambert or Chibrikov in this group, but don't get too excited yet. I do think that all of those guys are likely to also end up with the Moose here pretty soon, unless something really changes. And I know some folks in the comments on our previous episode yesterday were sort of pissed about that. Look, I'm not trying to tell you that I want this to happen, but I think it's what's likely to happen. The Jets not having made some trades this offseason to make room on the roster kind of leaves guys like Lambert and Chibrikov in a bit of a tough spot, unless one of them really blows the doors off of the coaching staff. I don't really see them making the team. Do I think that's the right thing? Probably not. I think with Lambert especially, it's a tricky situation because he's not really ready for the second line center role, but you kind of want to warm him up to it, right? But you also don't have the luxury of giving him a super long leash just because the Jets, for better or for worse, have intended to make the playoffs. And I think that that's sort of maybe something that gets a little bit overlooked. I personally don't care if the Jets make the postseason this year. My focus is on the development, and that's kind of been, how I've looked at it for a long time, is that this year really should be focused on the youth. But the team is obviously in a market that requires high attendance, and let's be real, right? If the Jets aren't winning lots of games, attendance does dip. It's not cheap to go to a game. I know plenty of folks who have had to, change their season ticket holder status, and so Winnipeg doesn't probably feel that comfortable with the idea of going a more retooling / rebuilding route, which I don't think that they would even have to worry about that too much. But I do think the decline in quality is going to be noticeable this year, which is tough. And so Lambert and Chibrikov, while, for me, Chibrikov really should be making the team, and Lambert probably should have some sort of role here where he's maybe sheltered and gets acclimated to the NHL. I just don't think they're going to do that because Winnipeg has lots of skaters and veterans that they're going to probably go with right now because they don't want to lose them on waivers. They aren't willing to trade them yet. And so it's just a weird spot. But looking at the line combinations, you've got Connor-Scheifele and Vilardi together, which, my thought on this, I don't think it's going to go that well. I know that they had a good game the other day against, Edmonton, but I'm telling you, if you actually play NHL caliber starters, that first line is probably going to look a lot like it did in previous seasons. But maybe it'll go better this time. I mean, last year we didn't have like a huge sample size with them, but I'll be honest, I'm not seeing it. I didn't see it last year. We know what, Connor and Scheifele usually look like together. Maybe the second or third time around is going to fix it. I don't know. But I'm just not putting a lot of stock in that trio. The line I would be interested in, though, is Perfetti, Nemesnikov, and Ehlers. I think that that's a pretty dangerous trio. And look, Nemesnikov may not be the world's greatest 2C on like a top-end contender, but for what the Jets are going to ask of him right now, he's probably your best option. He can score reasonably well. He can do some defensive work. He's a good forechecker. And again, would he be a 2C on like an elite team? No. But for what the Jets are kind of working with right now, in lieu of not really having anyone else ready for the job, I mean, it'll do, right? It's not what I would love, but again, sometimes you just have to suck it up and go with what you're working with at present. So the third line, you're looking at Niederreiter, Lowry, and Appleton. Again, this line is great, but the problem is that, offensively, there is some limited upside, and that's where I've really been advocating for Chibrikov to get in. But Appleton is very beloved by the coaching staff. They're not going to bench him, most likely. And so Chibrikov, I feel like because, he can be sent down again, I wouldn't be shocked if that's the route that they go. Your fourth line, you've got Barron, Kupari, and Iafallo, which is fine. The thing with Kupari is that, he often looks impressive, but when it comes to his actual game, I just question how much is really going to translate into meaningful performances. We've seen him do great in camp and in early scrimmages and stuff. He even had some good looks last year early on. And, I can see why teams have occasionally looked at him. And certainly, LA probably gave him as much of a leash as they felt they could. But I also see why LA didn't decide to retain him. The Jets have gotten a guy who's got all the tools of a player with great skating and, super soft hands, but the processing speed just hasn't aligned. And so Kupari, I mean, as a 4C, it's fine. I don't think it's anything I'm really upset about, but I probably would have gone with Gustafsson in my personal feeling. Speaking of Gus, he's with Toninato and Jonsson-Fjällby, which looks like a moose line, if you ask me. I also see Anderson, Dolan, Lambert, and Chibrikov together, which, again, probably another moose line. You're starting to see where all of these dominoes are falling, and unless Lambert does something that basically convinces the coaching staff there is zero way he can be left off the Jets roster, I don't think they're making a spot for him. I'm a little disappointed. I did also hope that Lambert himself would be a little further along, but it just seems like, against NHLers, he was okay. That's fine. I don't think you have to be perfect. And, a lot of people, again, in my last episode were telling me what I've already told you repeatedly. You don't have to be ready coming into the league, but you have to be able to keep up. And I don't quite know if Lambert is at that stage yet where you can trust him with relatively frequent minutes. It's a shame, but I think he just needs a little more seasoning and marination. And it would have been nice if the Jets had a spot in the bottom six for him to start getting those NHL reps. But as it is right now, I just don't see it happening unless Winnipeg does something here in the next couple of weeks and gives him a chance to make the team. But honestly, if anyone really does deserve to make the team, it's Chibrikov. Chibrikov is going to probably start with a moose, and I feel like that in and of itself isn't good enough. I really feel like he, of any prospect we've had in camp, honestly deserved a shot at the Jets, but it doesn't appear to be that way, so it is what it is. Now, on defense, you've got Morrissey and DeMello. You had Sandberg and Pionk earlier, but apparently Sandberg and Miller have also gotten a shift together, and we've even seen Salamonson and Pionk together. So some interesting stuff. Actually, Salamonson and Miller have also spent some time together, so there were a couple of different changes here and there, but a very interesting option to see Salamonson here in camp early, just because Fleury and Coughlin obviously need waivers and stuff, and so the Jets might be trying to get them down first and have Salamonson on the roster for a little bit until they feel they're ready to send him back down and have one of the injured guys return. So interesting wrinkles, some interesting stuff to kind of keep an eye out for. Sandberg Pionk is not exactly my favorite pairing, but it is what it is. Salamonson and Miller could be an interesting third pairing. So if that does end up happening this coming season for a few games or a few weeks, would be interesting. But otherwise, the Jets are really finalizing camp cuts. We'll get more of them soon here over the next couple of weeks. But As the Jets wrap up preseason, it's probably worth talking about some of the bigger highlights and bigger stories from what's been a fairly interesting start to the year, right? Some happiness, maybe some things that are a little concerning. We'll chat about all of that in just a little bit. Before we go too much further, though, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at Gametime. When it comes to buying tickets, a lot of you are used to paying lots of very expensive prices. You add a couple of tickets to your cart, or maybe even, in most cases, just one ticket. And when you get to check out, you find out that that one ticket costs 2 to 3 times what you were expecting. You ask yourself, did you maybe add a few too many tickets? But you find out the quantity still says 1. You just got hit with tons of surprise fees and hidden charges. I've had that happen tons of times buying Orioles tickets or even buying concert tickets. That one is a notorious one for me personally, but maybe you've tried to buy Jets tickets or perhaps Vikings tickets, and it's tough saving time and money. Gametime totally gets your frustration. That's why they have an option that you can toggle called all-in pricing, which lets you see what you're paying up front. They also want to help you save time and money with an even better feature called Gametime Picks, which filters out the fluff to show you only the most incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching for seats in a sea of thousands of tickets. And of course, Gametime already has great super deals. They offer you views from your seat when available, so you can actually see what you're paying for, and they offer you curated deals to find the best options possible. So if you're ready to take the guesswork out of buying tickets, download the Gametime app, create an account, and be sure to use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. While we're at it, I did also want to shout out our friends and partners at FanDuel. Obviously, the NFL season has gotten underway, and as a Ravens fan, it's been a pretty interesting start to the year. We are now 2-2. Big win against the Bills, but perhaps you're a Vikings fan and you're really impressed with the start with their defense, right? Obviously, the Vikes have had a bit of a rough past couple of seasons. There's been some highs, there's been some lows, but now they seem to have at least figured something out. Well, either way, you might be interested in getting in on all of the action. And right now, you can get a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, check out live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets, so you'll always stay up to date on the action as it is happening. If you place a bet right now of just $5, you can get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place that first $5 bet. That's $200 guaranteed in bonus bets with a $5 bet. All at FanDuel.com. Get started and get in on the action right now. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are just following up on some preseason thoughts, and obviously the Jets are wrapping up preseason this week. I am personally pretty excited to wrap this up and get on to the actual regular season, right? Winnipeg has kind of had a bit of a mixed preseason, but I think that it's just one of those things where, Winnipeg wasn't really using many of its starters early. Now they've started filtering in, but all that said, I think we've gotten some very interesting looks at a couple of key things. Let's talk about the special teams, because I think if we're talking about something for the regular season that's really impactful, the special teams is probably where I'd start, just because regardless of what young players were in the lineup, the special teams will remain pretty consistent, especially tactically and how we see the power play and PK develop. On the power play, the puck movement, especially once you started seeing more of the starters in the lineup, was very fun to watch. There was great one-touch passing, rapid cycling, quick movement, lots of passes across the Royal Road in front of the goalie, all the stuff that a normal power play would just have kind of hook, line, and sinker already. But for some reason in previous years, the Jets' PP was, well, not particularly powerful. Very static, not exactly showing a lot of rotation, and oftentimes when it pivoted through the point man from, Morrissey or whoever it was that would be manning that space out by the blue line, there was just slowness. Guys wouldn't really move off the puck. There wasn't a lot of overlapping and spot changing, and so everyone just kind of waited for something to happen, and usually that something to happen was for Kyle Connor to take a slap shot that got read and saved. Now it seems like guys are rotating pretty freely. We even heard that Scheifele at times would play the bumper in practice. Didn't really see as much of that in the actual application, but if he can get back into that slot area, that is where Scheifele used to make his bread and butter like 5 or 6 years ago. He was a menace in the slot for the Jets on the PP. So hopefully we see that again. But I think the main thing that you notice is just a quickness of puck movement and, the rapid distribution. Perfetti also looking pretty good on the power play, which is going to be big this year. I think he is going to be a huge passer for this team. And on that second unit where he'll most likely start, I think he'll be an extremely versatile offensive threat, which makes me very excited. I'm already happy about Perfetti finally getting his contract in, even though it's not as long as I would hope for it to be. But, the main thing, right, is that he now has 2 years to really show the Jets why, in my mind, he should have been extended for the foreseeable future. But for the PK, I thought looked okay. They were aggressive, and they did try to put pressure on the puck carriers and attack the space around the blue line. But, I mean, it's hard to really read too much into preseason stuff just because the PK isn't going to be tested by top-end shooters, right? So, Winnipeg itself didn't dress the best defensive units ever. And I think at times, Kakinen or even Hellebuck would get screened. There were some pucks that probably leaked through that might not get through during the regular season, especially on those point shots that have given the Jets trouble in the past. But, I mean, I'm going to reserve judgment on the PK right now. I want to see a little more against, actual NHL top units, because that's when you face real skill where you're constantly having to rotate to apply that pressure, cut off that space, and just generally force opponents to make mistakes. And I think if Winnipeg is going to have guys shifting a little more freely in the PK diamond, it is going to open up more space and more potential for mistakes. But by the same token, it also forces your opponents to make clean passes. And if Scheifele and Kyle Connor are manning the PK on a more routine basis, that means the Jets are going to counter skill with skill. And Kyle Connor is certainly dangerous when he gets the breakaways in one-on-one matchups, especially against a unit that might not be using more than just one defender on the back end. So, I mean, the idea is there, right? I just want to see what it looks like in practice against top-end talent. And it'll be a little bit before we start to see that. So for the special teams, I would say so far strides are looking to be made in the right areas. We just have to see how it bears out once the Jets play quality NHL teams. Now, in terms of other takeaways, I think for our prospects, Lambert still has some work to do, but I mean, he's not far off. I think he's closer than it appears. But I think it's going to be a little bit hard for him to earn that 2C spot anytime this season. I think it's going to take him a little more seasoning, and we'll see how that shapes up. But Jagr, I would say, was really impressive. He looks NHL ready as soon as next season. I think he'll be fighting for a spot with Winnipeg in the upcoming fall camp next year. I wouldn't be shocked if he even gets onto the team. He just plays a really defensively mature game, and he also has some really nice scoring instincts. His release is very highly regarded. I think his vision and spatial awareness are great, and so it's just a matter of adapting it to the NHL speed. But so far in camp, I mean, he's even scored against the Wild. I mean, he's just looked really good. I think compared to like McGroarty, right? Jagr always was going to have the more developed two-way game. In my mind, I think McGroarty does have a little bit more of an offensive edge to his game, but Jagr is no slouch there. Wouldn't shock me if he becomes like a really good middle six player for the Jets. And if that's the case, I mean, you have to be very happy with getting a guy who was picked, 14th overall, same as McGroarty was. And, he ends up being a guy who's like an every game sort of player and offers you, maybe 40, 50 points of offense every season. Great shot. And is also just a smart two-way center who can perhaps one day slide into the second line center spot. I think that's a little ambitious to ask of him right now, but if there was one player who I could see tracking into that, sheerly on the defensive merit so far, then Jagr's probably got a little more of an inside track to that, especially once he actually reaches eligibility for the pro leagues. But in the meantime, Barlow, I thought was okay. I think he still has some work getting up to pro level speed, but if he does that here pretty soon, maybe he'll look a little more impressive with the Moose next season. But for his preseason camp, solid enough. Just has lots of work to do. Selemonson, I think he's got work to do in terms of getting up to speed as well. I think the timing and space, especially in North America, are going to be a little bit challenging at first, but it'll be interesting to see if he actually sticks with the Jets all through camp and into the start of the season. If he does, I would hope that he's able to really prove that he's closer to the NHL than his early camp and preseason looked. He had some bright moments, some not so great moments where he made a couple of poor decisions. But I mean, he's a young rookie in a league that's very, very tough. This is his first time playing against North American competition, so it's going to be a learning curve. But if there's one defensive prospect on this Jets team that I think is really smart and is going to adapt to North America relatively quickly, it's Salamanson. His mind processes the game at an extremely high level, and I think he's got the work ethic to match it. So for him, I'm really excited to see what he does this year. Once he goes back to the Moose, unless he stays up somehow, I think he'll really make Manitoba's blue line a lot stronger and more secure. So overall, I think this preseason showed some really fun glimpses of the future. It also showed that the Jets still have some work to do in the present. And, kind of thinking about that, I wanted to chat a little bit on the road ahead because I have some stuff in mind that I think that we're going to see here over the next couple of weeks. And some of it I'm excited about. Some of it I'm, perhaps a little more ambivalent about. But we'll chat about all of that in just a little bit. Before we go too much further, though, just wanted to shout out our friends and partners at Indeed. We're all driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Indeed is the job hiring service that helps you ditch the busy work where you can schedule, screen, and message some of the top candidates in your industry. Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster either. 93% of employers agree that Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites. As somebody who's actually used Indeed myself, when I was looking for work, I can attest to the fact that the resume system is very detailed, and it actually matches you not only based on your job experience and your personal interest and domain of discipline, but also your salary requirements. So when you're interfacing with an employer or vice versa, you're actually getting a good match for the position that makes a lot of sense for both parties. And you can, stop wasting time applying to stuff that's maybe not in your salary range, or if you're an employer, you can immediately screen out candidates who just don't meet your genuine requirements. So, there's over 300 or over 3.5 million businesses out there worldwide that already use Indeed as it is. I would say it's a great service. I've personally had nothing but positive experiences. And, in the past, I've actually gotten some job offers through Indeed. It's great. And if you're really looking to get the best quality candidates out there, there's a special offer for all of you listeners. You can get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on the Locked On Winnipeg Jets show. That's Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we're just wrapping up here real quick with some thoughts ahead of some potential stuff the Jets are going to be doing over the next couple of weeks. Obviously, we are wrapping up preseason, just 2 games left against the Flames, and with Winnipeg kind of needing to narrow down the final roster cuts, we'll probably know by this coming weekend what Winnipeg has in store for the team. So I expect Connor-Scheifele-Vilardi to be the line heading into the start of the season. I don't really know that I have a lot of confidence in that unit. I want to, but from what I've seen, generally speaking, I have no reason to be anything other than skeptical. But there's a chance that maybe Arniel has figured out a way to make this trio work. The other thing that I expect is that, the remaining players like Chibrikov and Lambert get sent down to the Moose. I think Anderson Dolan probably gets sent down as well. I thought he actually looked all right in camp in the sense that I think he can keep up at the NHL level. But if you're asking me if he's going to beat out players like Gustafsson or Iafallo or Kupari, the answer is probably not. I think a lot of these guys to me are all sort of in that same tier of bottom 6 player who's very capable of playing for the Jets' 4th line, but the Jets only have 1 4th line with 3 spots available. So Barron's probably a lock to make it. Gustafson is probably a fringe, maybe like 13th forward option. Iafallo will start, because A, he's great on the PK, and B, Jets coaching staffs seem to really like Iafallo. I think that their assessment of his ability is higher than what it really is when it comes to doing stuff that's not just in the bottom six, but, to each their own. As far as like Kupari is concerned, I think he's probably shown enough during preseason and camp where the Jets are like impressed by his ability. But again, if you replaced him with Anderson Dolan or Gustafson or Toninato, I don't know if it'd really make that much of a difference, right? Where I think you start to really talk about a difference is if you're using guys like Lambert. And I just, with how the Jets have been this preseason and what they're doing in camp and stuff, I don't think that's likely that that's where Brad will start. I think the Jets probably look at him as a guy that you maybe even have to use in your top six, or I guess in the worst case scenario, your third line, which if it was the third line, I'd be fine with that. I think, using him as a sheltered alternate to Lowry is a great option. You give him the right talent, maybe like a Perfetti who can help him defensively, and an Ehlers who can also provide that transition offense. I don't really see why that wouldn't be a good idea, but I mean, the Jets don't seem to be wanting to go that route for now. So unless something changes, I would expect Brad to start with a Moose. Now, do I think that's an unfair conclusion to make? No, I think Brad probably needed to show a little more to really earn the coaching staff's trust, and I didn't quite see it enough. I saw flashes of it, and I think that there were some really good signs that he's close to the NHL, but it just doesn't seem like it's ready to happen yet. So a little more seasoning required, I guess. Prefer if it would have happened at the NHL level, but I get why Winnipeg might not be feeling that just yet. So Chibrikov really should have been, for me, the guy to make the Jets out of camp. I would be very disappointed if he doesn't, and I'm almost certain he's not, because Winnipeg has loads of guys who play wing, and they're all still on the team. So Chibrikov, I feel by virtue of Winnipeg's roster kind of squeezing him out, just doesn't have a spot here. And I feel like, given how good he was in preseason, it's kind of crazy that he's not going to make the team. Unless the Jets really surprise me and go above and beyond with what I feel is within my realm of expectation, I think he and Lambert are both going to be spending time in Winnipeg's top six, or Manitoba's top six. So a little bit disappointed. It's kind of weird that the Jets have, all of this focus on youth, and it doesn't really seem like they're actually going to have many of the youth make the team out of camp. Salamonson, who was maybe the most fringe option for me, might actually make the team over some of the other defensive options, although with him, it might just be the waiver eligibility. So, I have frustrations with how all of this has sort of panned out. I think Lambert also maybe was a little bit more of a step behind some of the play against actual NHLers, and that could be a really compelling reason why he's not here with the Jets yet. But by the same token, you have to at some point commit to playing the kids or not. And if you're not willing to have them, earn their keep, then, I don't really know what the plan is going forward. So a lot of stuff to digest. I think for me, preseason's kind of been, some interesting, fun little moments, but overall, I just feel like I still have a lot of questions about which direction the Jets are going. Arneal has, a lot to do to, walk the walk. He certainly talked the talk during the start of the offseason. I haven't really seen enough to where I'm feeling confident that he is the guy to take the team forward. He talks a lot of the right things, but I just want to see it reflected in how the team is actually deployed. So I'm going to reserve judgment until the start of the season, but, so far, bit of a mixed bag in terms of what I'm actually getting from this team's movements and how they've approached preseason. But maybe you feel differently. Maybe I'm totally off my rocker. Drop your thoughts and comments on how the team has performed so far in the comments below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that is going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We'll have even more off-season and preseason coverage here over the next couple of days as we start rolling into the actual start of the year. So see you then. Thanks for listening, and as always, have a great night, and go Jets go.